Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Raineri. I'm a pianist and the artistic director of the Brisbane Music Festival. You're watching the 5th episode in a Meet the Creative Team interview series, which is running concurrently alongside the 2021 Brisbane Music Festival. And it's such a pleasure today to be chatting with one of Australia's most respected composers, Mr. Brett Dean. Thank you for joining me, Brett.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Alex. Thank you.
I am playing a solo piano work of Brett's in a show called Crimson, which, if you're watching this interview now, is happening next week on March the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th, 3 shows, playing music by Brett Dean, Brahms, Beethoven, Rebecca Saunders, and Antonia Barnett McIntosh. Brett, I would love to talk a little bit about the music of yours that I'm playing, which is a homage to Brahms. I'd love if you would share a little bit about how and why this work kind of came to be.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I've been writing a steadily growing set of homage pieces that have taken me from Bach through to Kortag thus far. And that was a kind of conscious decision of mine to come to terms with piano writing across the ages and across the genres and eras. Partly also because I'm not a pianist, I'm not a trained pianist, and my piano skills are fine for, you know, the sort of work I do when I'm composing and sorting out harmonic structures and so on. But you know, it's certainly the pieces I've written are far beyond my own technical capabilities, but it was a way of getting to grips with you know, technical issues. So in that sense, that's why I've called them etudes, even though, you know, I hope they work as concert pieces and not just studies. And this one was written in, this set of pieces was written in 2013 as a commission for the American pianist Emanuel Axe. And we chatted about what the pieces could be, and he was already very open to the idea of it being an homage sort of piece. I wasn't at that stage sure who it would be an homage to. But Manny invited me to see a recital he was giving with the violinist Frank Peter Zimmermann, with whom I'd already worked previously. And they were doing this concert in Dresden, at a festival in Dresden, with all 3 Brahms violin sonatas. And in the course of that evening, I was captivated, not for the first time in my life, by the character of Brahms's accompanying role writing for the piano. I mean, the fact that his writing in the sonatas with other instruments and the songs as well captures so much material, are so much a part of the drama, and yet retain this sort of accompanying aspect. And combining that with aspects of Brahms's own sort of personal story, the fact that he never married, that he had this sort of hard to determine sort of relationship with Clara Schumann, for example. I was aware of the fact that there was an aspect of Brahms that he was an accompanying figure to somebody that wasn't by his side, that he was a kind of a loner. And so this piece evolved out of the aspect of Brahms's, well, that aspect of his piano writing. In particular, the second piece of mine, which I'll come to. And it was sort of, it was sort of as if the accompaniment then turned into the main interest of the piece, that these accompanying figures then sort of evolved and flowered. So the second movement takes its initiation, at least, from a Brahms song, Meine Liebe ist grün, from Opus 63, and which in turn also becomes a bit of a study of that Brahmsian 3-against-2 sort of thing that is very much, you know, part of the rhythmic drive and drama of a lot of Brahms's music. But so it sort of evolved into these pieces, but at the same time, I was always fascinated by the Opus 119, the final set of piano pieces of Brahms. And in particular, the very first one, the B minor one, that sort of has this strangely ambiguous harmonic world that seems like it could have been by Debussy or something. And so then slowly but surely this idea evolved that it would be 3 movements that would be nestled, embedded within the set of Opus 119 pieces. And the first of them, in a way, is also vague in that sense that it could almost be an accompaniment for something else, for a, you know, an as yet unwritten vocal line, if you like. But I just have always loved that strange world that he conjured there, which was quite unusual for him. And he even wrote about it as such. He even wrote a letter to Clara at the time that he'd written it, and of course, late in Brahms's life, saying, you know, I've written this thing that I have to show you. I'm not quite sure about it. And it sort of has these strange dissonances, but I think I kind of like it, and you might too, sort of thing. I mean, it was, you know, very ambiguous about it himself.
Yeah, no, it's a little bit as well in make sure I get the opus numbers in my head correct. The kind of later, after Opus 119 in Brahms, I think the clarinet sonatas are Opus 120. And
Opus 120, yeah.
And the clarinet trio that's somewhere in there as well. But
in there as well, 115 maybe, yeah.
Kind of Opus 117, 118, 119 are all piano pieces, and they, for me, I kind of played most of it, and most Brahms chamber music as well. It does have that incredible, what you're talking about, like slow tumble, that something about it maybe isn't right, but also feels so correct in its oddness. And it's something that I've actually really loved exploring when I've been kind of preparing your works as the kind of not interludes, but kind of, you know, the in-between movements in this kind of then Brahms / Dean 7 movement thing that has been concocted. It's been really interesting for me thinking about how, you know, how a Brahms ends and how a Dean begins, and similarly, you know, at the other end of it. And I really appreciate and love what you've done with matching this feeling of kind of slow harmonic tumble with lots of kind of things happening in the inner world of the music. So that's something I really love about the music.
Oh, that's good that comes across. I mean, interestingly, he, you know, Brahms himself was very uncertain about it, as I was saying in this letter to Clara Schumann. But also, I am fascinated by that sort of old world meets new world contrast that happens between the Brahms movements, and or as it goes from Brahms into my pieces and back again. That was something that I thought about quite a lot, you know, just to get that sense of the sense of change just right. I mean, the one that does sort of sit outside of the Brahmsian thing in a way is the last of my pieces, which is kind of a completely different sound world and removing itself from any sort of Brahmsian figurations, in a sense, with the very exception at the very end, the exception of these double-handed sort of outwards and downwards, upwards, arpeggio things. That is a kind of a nod to that beautiful passage towards the end of the second movement of the second piano concerto of Brahms. The trills that sort of flourish outwards.
Right.
And again, that was sort of me just sort of trying out pianistic moments in a way. But with its sort of pendulum back and forth thing, it was quite I was striving for something that was completely outside of the Brahmsian world, whereas the first two pieces sort of lock on to the pieces that have just been played and take us somewhere else and back again. And the middle of mine, as I say, is very much quoting, at least to start with, quoting a moment from a Brahms song.
Well, I also I really love that the third of your pieces takes the tempo right back. I mean, in a way, it feels very timeless and frozen. These kind of very slow alternating chords with these kind of fragile little gestures that happen. But I mean, without your works in between, the four Brahms pieces essentially get more and more, like they pick up pace, so that as a whole, they feel very much like a slow tumble forward. But I like that in expanding to a 7 movement work instead of the 4 original, that there is this moment of, before Brahms number 3 tumbles into Brahms number 4, we're forced to kind of suddenly withdraw and recalibrate in a way.
I mean, you kind of start playing around with these things, and that was what I came up with anyway. That just before we hear the very final piece for piano that Brahms ever wrote, and given the central role that piano played in his life and in his output, it's this sort of little moment of pause, I guess, before that gorgeous E flat major final number, which is pretty virtuosic too, isn't it? I mean,
it's got some heft. Yeah,
it's got real heft. I so wish I was there to hear you play the whole set. I mean,
well look, we're making a video of the final show, so
that's fantastic. I look forward to catching up with that.
But before we kind of wrap up this interview, because it's really interesting asking you about the inner workings of these pieces. I'm interested in this kind of idea of homage more generally, and I'm curious about how you view within your own kind of compositional writing, how you view the role of paying respect to the entire kind of huge history of classical music, and whether homage is something that you feel is embedded on some level within all of your work, or whether it's more literal in these particular works and your other homage pieces.
It does play a role, certainly. I mean, I feel, I mean, my desire to compose certainly came out of being a player. I'd never studied composition formally, so it came as a response to all the music that I knew and had played, and sitting there in the viola section of the Berlin Philharmonic with these incredible sounds around me, it sort of, I don't know, demanded a response, and some of that response came from what it was I was hearing, for sure. And it being, particularly in those days, in the 80s and 90s, it was even much more a kind of bastion of German Hochkultur than it is now, arguably. And it's sort of, it has moved on from that old golden Karajan era where it was Brahms, and more Brahms, and a bit of Bruckner. But I mean, the thing that did fascinate me at that stage, just as an aside, was that when the orchestra did play contemporary or more modern music, it just brought this beautiful sheen to the sound that, it sort of was, at the same time, whilst it was a very conservative sort of artistic statement that the Berlin Philharmonic made, particularly in the Karajan years, when it did venture out of that, it was an incredible advocate for new and newer music because it just made it sound so fabulous. But so certainly to start with, there was a very big aspect of that homage aspect, and as Auden, the poet W.H. Auden, would say, the first 10 years of a creative process, you're imitating others, and the rest of your life you're imitating yourself. And so, it was very much a learning process too. I mean, I was a very late starter as a composer, and yet I was in my, late 20s by the time I really started taking it up more seriously. I was the young composer who was imitating what it was that I loved. And it was only through those processes that I worked out who I was as a composer. These three Brahms pieces actually, in what we were sort of discussing earlier, in a sense, encapsulate quite a bit of the things that inspire me. So certainly, the homage to great music of the past is part of that. But as I was explaining with the third of the three of my pieces, it's quite a conscious desire to make my own statement in the midst of all this Brahmsian stuff around it, to sort of say, but hang on, who am I? Where do I want to go? And that's, sort of encapsulated in this set of three pieces, is that there's these sort of links to Brahms going off in its own direction, certainly. The second one even starting with a quote of Brahms, but sort of venturing into its own world. But the third one absolutely going a different direction entirely, and just sort of putting all that Brahms stuff to one side, as much as I love it, And that's, in a way, a kind of microcosm of, my compositional processes in a larger context. Yes, the music of the past fascinates me. It's something I love deeply and have been immersed in my whole life. But, there's also a great desire to work out what my own responses are, particularly as I've, acquired, hopefully, a bit more technique as a composer along the way, So, as I said, this whole set of homage pieces, and I think there are close to 10 of them now that will be part of a collection coming out in the next year or two, were a conscious decision just to get to grips with piano writing of the past, as I said. But even within that, they sort of venture out onto their own pathways as well. And that's sort of, I guess, one aspect of who I am as a composer.
Yeah. Oh, that was a really beautiful, insightful answer to that horrible question that I asked you. Thank you. But, thank you so much. I mean, that I think hopefully for listeners gives lots of really interesting insight into what they might expect from the shows next week. So thank you so much, Brett, for taking this time to speak with me, and for sharing all of this with our viewers.
My pleasure, Alex, and have a great few concerts and a great festival. I'm thrilled to know that you're in charge of the Brisbane Festival. It's wonderful. May it flourish.
Music Festival. May it flourish, indeed.
Yeah.
For listeners curious about tickets, you can jump over to the festival website, which is www.brismusicfestival.com. There's 3 shows on March the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th. Music by Brett Dean, Brahms, Beethoven, Rebecca Saunders, and Antonia Barnett McIntosh. And I hope to see some of the viewers there. Thanks again, Brett.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Best wishes.